Hello and welcome to Marketing Tech. This is my second episode, and I'm talking with Elmer Boutin. He's a veteran SEO and a veteran as well, and he's been in the industry a little longer than I have. I've been in it 17. He's been in it 20 plus years. He's more on the agency side. Dave Davies and myself are more of the independent contractor, work at home kind of people, and Elmer has been definitely worked in the corporate and that side of things. Welcome, Elmer.
Well, thank you very much. I appreciate the opportunity to come and chat with you.
Cool. So today, we want to talk about different things. I think you're a good example for us to talk about. I'm going to talk about this with several people probably, but the Mac versus PC, why you're doing it, that kind of thing. We might talk a little bit about headphones. We talked about that a minute ago. And of course, you've got some interesting stuff. You have done, Morse Code, and you do, what do you call it?
I had to learn Morse Code to get my amateur radio license.
Oh, that's right, radio license.
In 1990. That was when I got my my ham radio license. And at that time, you had to learn a minimum of 5 words a minute. And I thought it was interesting. You were talking to Steve about adaptive technology, and this gentleman built something for his daughter that allowed her to type in Morse code.
Yeah, it was called the Darcy card. Yeah.
Exactly. I thought that is hugely innovative and actually quite simple because Morse code is the very first digital communication means, if you think about it in its truest sense.
Sure.
And being able to do that makes absolute sense. When I was very active in ham radio, we used to, I didn't do Morse code all that quickly. I barely passed the 5 word a minute test. I think the fastest I could ever listen was about 10. And that was as far as I got. They don't have a Morse code requirement anymore because worldwide, it's kind of fallen out of favor. You really, with so many digital modes, you really don't need Morse code anymore. Right. Although there's still some folks that do use it. But anyway, I had back when I had my Commodore 64, so this is going back a little bit, I had an interface device. It was basically a modem for most different types of, analog modes for transmitting data, RTTY, radio teletype, and those types. And it would actually interpret Morse code. So you could dial into a Morse code. And if you were like me, really not that great at copying it, it would play it for you, which was kind of interesting. So taking that and putting it into reverse and making that into adaptive technology for computers, it completely makes sense. And it's innovative, but very simple.
Right. To tell you how long ago that was, it was a PC MCIA card, those little cards that went in your laptop. It was.
Oh, yeah.
That was,
I remember those.
96, I think it was. It was quite a long time ago. There's a big conference in Minneapolis every year. I don't know if it's still going on, but there was a big adaptive technology conference every year in Minneapolis. And I went to that one year. It was very interesting. So
very cool.
So you work at GTB.
It's in Dearborn, Michigan. And I've been at GTB for going on 4 years now. I've been in the agency world since 2012. Before that, I was in-house SEO, but I was also in charge of kind of everything. If it had to do with the web servers and the websites, I did it. I managed all the servers, all the physical hardware, because we hosted our own websites at that place. I did most of the programming. We were doing ASP.NET, so I wrote a lot of custom applications, not only for our internal or our external customers, but also for internal. We had an intranet where I would write different web applications for helping with the manufacturing process that was going on in the various stages of that process, which was kind of interesting. I also wrote a custom truck dispatching web-based application. I learned more about trucks and trucking during the weeks that I worked on that project than probably I ever thought I would ever learn. But it was fascinating stuff, especially the way that company operated their trucks. It was actually quite innovative, and the way they ran their schedule was like a duty roster in the military. So I was like, oh. I get to use some of this stuff I learned in the Army and actually apply it to something practical.
Yeah, I actually had a client in the past that his website was kind of like an eBay Motors, but for just semi trucks. And so I learned a lot about trucks. And that's one of the interesting things about our industry, at least for someone like me, where am constantly introduced to new types of businesses. I'm just, I've worked with hundreds of different types of businesses over the years, and it's just interesting. I've sold bread in a can. I've sold gravestones. It's just weird the things you run into.
Yeah, it is. I remember one of my very first clients when I was doing freelance back in the 90s. It was a gentleman who owned an art gallery that sold limited edition lithographs. And his whole business was pretty much military-oriented stuff. This was by a military post in Texas, so it just kind of made sense he would sell military-related prints. And I remember I spent the first 2 or 3 weeks just going to his shop, spending a couple hours here and there learning about his business, which was fascinating. Like you said, you get to learn about things that you otherwise might not have any exposure to, which is great. Just, broadening your knowledge and just making you a smarter person overall, or at least you hope so.
So obviously you're working at home right now. Was that what you were doing before the COVID?
No, I wasn't. At this particular role, I was in the office every day. So yeah, it's quite a difference. But when I was at my previous agency, I worked from home quite a bit. Almost everybody was remote, which was kind of fascinating.
Was it a hard transition for the company? Because obviously, I know some companies they were already set up for that, and some of them had to scramble to get things ready for it.
It wasn't for me. At my previous agency, I worked from home quite a bit. I was really the remote person. Very few people worked in the office that were on my SEO team at the time. I was in an office in Austin, Texas for a time, and there were 2 of us there. But for the most part, I work from home, so it's not that new to me. And here at GTB, about half my team is remote. They're in different parts of Michigan, so it wasn't really that big of a transition for me or for the rest of us. And we actually adapted quite well. I always say, if you want to be successful in SEO, one of the things you got to have is a decent computer and an internet connection, and it doesn't matter where in the world it is.
Right.
You can do your work.
Right. Yeah, I know people. Like Dave Davis and his wife. They constantly work from all over the world. They travel a lot for speaking engagements or just vacations. I mean, they're going to Whistler to go skiing, I guess, this next week, and they'll be working there too. And that's so they can go anywhere. I see pictures of our friends on Facebook. With their the obligatory foot picture when you're at the beach. I see that.
Right. Yeah. I met a lady at PubCon in Austin this past February, and she lives in a trailer. They just travel around the country. And she has an internet connection, however she pulls it off.
Right.
I don't remember if it was satellite or if she was using like some sort of MiFi or something like that. But I thought that was fascinating. They would just, where are we going to live tomorrow, and pack up and go. Right. Didn't matter. And her clients were happy. She's doing great work. I thought it was fascinating. It was really interesting talking to her.
So what is your personal everyday computer?
Personal everyday computer is a fairly recent MacBook Pro. I started using Macs about 5 or 6 years ago. And so here's the great PC versus Mac debate. For me, it had nothing to do with the operating system. It had everything to do with the fact that I was doing a lot of copying and pasting work at the time. Hours and hours and hours of copying and pasting. And I kept breaking off the Windows keys on the laptops that my agency was giving us at the time. And I went through 4 of them in 2 months. And I finally said, this is ridiculous. I need to do something with this. And the head of our tech support group said, you know what? We're going to give you a Mac. You can't break those keys off. And I said, all right, send it on. And it took a little adjusting because I had worked on Macs a little bit here and there. When I was doing my in-house SEO job, I had a Mac on my desk because I needed to test the websites in a Mac. But other than that, I rarely ever used one. But once I got past it, I haven't broken a key yet. I've dropped them and broken them, but that's another story.
Yeah, I've been working on PC since at least 96, probably before that. But I even worked on 286s way back in the day. Didn't really work on. I played on them, but I think that's where I played Tetris.
Yeah, that was a great game on those.
But I was very anti-Mac for the longest time, and about 5 years ago, I was starting up my WMEtraining.com, my training company, and I was going to be making some training videos and stuff. And everything I was looking at, everybody had a Mac. Everybody had a Mac. So I thought, you know what?
Yeah.
I can go to Best Buy. I can buy this. If I don't like it, I can return it. So I got it, and I was like, wow, this really is nice. I mean, and the thing I got to believe about and to understand about Macs is that they just work. I mean, like I said before, there's pros and cons to both. Macs work a lot better, have a lot less problems, but they're a lot harder to modify or to do special things with. So you can't do really custom stuff like you can on a PC. And so that they're very restrictive, lockdown environment. And my biggest problem, it's funny you say copying and paste, and that was my biggest problem moving over when I got there, because PC and Macs use very different hotkeys for that. And so that was a hard thing for me.
Well, it's, Windows C, Windows V or versus Command C or Command V. To me, that wasn't the biggest difference. The other parts of it were working in like Excel. When you get Excel for Mac, it is not the same as it is on Windows. There's certain things you can't do. Like, it's harder to like use VB script and things like that because they just don't come on a Mac. So what I found at my other agency, I was using OpenOffice. The nice thing about OpenOffice that I like that even Excel on Windows doesn't do is support regular expressions natively, which is really helpful.
Yeah.
And I started using regular expressions a lot when I was programming in ASP.NET, so it was a really easy thing for me to use to filter stuff. Now, thanks to some great, online tutorials, I've looked at advanced filters in Excel, which work fairly similarly, but they're not quite the same. I still would like to revert back to regular expressions at times just because it's so much easier. Yeah. But I was never anti-Mac. I just never saw a reason to get one.
Right.
Especially back when I was doing a lot of PC stuff, like a lot of the ASP.NET programming I was doing. Obviously, that was all in Windows. And, I had Photoshop ran on Windows. For what I did with Photoshop, it wasn't that much faster. I mean, the 15 milliseconds you might save on boot up was not that big of a deal to me to need a Mac. So, right. It's 6 of one and half dozen of the others, but I will say I don't like Windows 10. We got a computer and it had it on there. My wife didn't like it and I didn't like it. And it's like, what are we going to do? And so when we finally moved all of our home applications to be cloud-based, we switched over to Linux.
Oh, okay.
So we wiped out all those computers and put Ubuntu Linux on them, and I'm really happy with that. It's a great operating system. I can run OpenOffice on it. And it, because most of the stuff we do is in the cloud, it just works out great.
Yeah, I have to say I've hated every version of Windows when it came out, and then by the time the next one came out, I loved whatever the last one was that I hated before. It's just. I mean, I remember Windows 3.1, and then 95. I was like, oh, this is horrible. And then 95 to 98 wasn't a big deal, but and then of course there was Vista and all the different ones, and Windows.
I don't think I ever used Vista.
Yeah, Windows 7 was pretty horrible. I didn't like that at all, and then 8 was an absolute nightmare. I actually had to install Windows 8 on a machine recently because that's all I had, and I had to upgrade it to 10 after that. So I had to use it for like a few minutes. It was horrible. It was just so bad. But I've gotten used to Windows 10. It works fine for me.
Yeah, I know some folks that really like it, and a lot of times it's that, what are you comfortable with? Yeah. So I like, I'm comfortable in a Mac now, so I really don't want to switch back.
Right.
Because, it's just, it's there, it's easy. Why fuss with it? And if I really, really need Windows, our agency has a Citrix setup that I can get into and do a remote desktop into a Windows experience. So on those occasions when I have to do stuff in Excel that I can't do on a Mac, I can remote into that and it works very nicely.
Nice. Yeah, I use something called Tight VNC, and I can actually remote into my PC from anywhere in the world, but because I have my router set up to send it through, and so that's very nice. It's free. There's actually a regular VNC which costs money, but the Tight VNC is free.
Oh, there you go. Yeah.
But back to what you were saying a while ago, as far as copying and pasting, it really was hard for me because control and command and those things, the keys weren't in the same place, and it wasn't quite the same.
That's true. They're not quite in the same place. But
and so I found a program called Carabiner, just like like when you're climbing, a carabiner starts with a K, and you can reassign all the keys, whatever you want them to do. It's really nice.
Oh, that could be handy for make the transition easier.
Yeah, I mean, it's really robust of what you can do. I think a couple versions of Windows ago, it kind of broke it, so it wasn't available for a little bit, and that was really hard on me. But they finally got it fixed to where it works on Mac now.
Excellent.
It works very good. So on the Citrix server, you just logging into a machine, or are you getting a virtual server, or how does that work?
You know what? I honestly don't know. Okay. All I know is I go in there and I log up, and boom, there it is, and it works. The IT folks at the agency take care of that, so I really have no idea. It works, and that's all I care about.
So what are the type programs you mentioned in one of your emails that you use Screaming Frog? Do you use anything else like that?
I use Screaming Frog a lot. To me, it's one of those go-to tools, and it's usually when I'm evaluating a brand new website, it's one of the first things I'll do. Especially if I don't have access to Google Search Console, is Screaming Frog's a great tool, and that's something that I like doing on the Citrix, because I can turn it on and let it run there in the background, and it's not. You and Dave were talking about that last time. With sometimes it's a memory hog, especially if you're doing a huge site. So it's nice being able to offload it onto something else and let it run. Right. And then, I can get the data to wherever I need it to go. But that way it's not interfering with whatever other work I might be doing. So it keeps me being productive without having to lose time.
You said you learned typing in the 80s. What grade in school were you when you learned typing?
Oh, yeah, that's a great story. So I was a sophomore or a junior in high school, and the school made typing a required class for everybody. And prior to that, it was offered as an elective. And I thought, what the heck do I need typing for? I'm never going to type. That's not me. I'm going to, do this or that. But, there we were in front of an IBM Selectric with keys with all of the letters wiped out. Oh, yeah. And you had to learn how to type without looking at the keyboard. And, and I managed to make it through. It was rough. I passed the class. And I don't remember what my typing speed was, but it was but I learned how to type, actually learn how to type, the way you're quote unquote supposed to. And I never in my life imagined that I would need that skill, but yet, when I was in the Army, I had several jobs where I had to take a typing test. And if I didn't type at least 20 words a minute, I couldn't pass the classes. By golly, there you go. And I thought, who would have ever thought that this would be that important? And now it's a matter of being productive, because when I have to type, I can type faster than, hunting and pecking like, I otherwise might have done.
Yeah. When we were kids, the vast majority of people who typed were women. Men didn't even learn it back then. It was just so.
Yeah, it was a whole other era. That's for sure. And if I remember correctly, the school that I went to, they had a curriculum that was specifically for, I don't know, they called it office skills or something like that. Right. And it was aimed for people who were going to do things like stenography or typing, things that nobody does anymore because it's not needed. Right. But yet in those days, it was still quite necessary. And I think that typing was part of it. And I have no idea who had the foresight to make it a required class, but I am grateful that they did, because like I said, it served me well through the years.
I was real lucky that that I was taught in fifth grade because, and this was, we're talking, I think I'm a little younger than you. This was 1980 when I was in fifth grade, or 79, something like that. And they taught us that because I was in a special class for the blind here in Houston. I wasn't usually put in a class for the blind, but I went to my parents moved around a lot. So this was one particular school had a very robust program for the blind. And so we were all taught how to type in fifth grade. And that was so useful. And by 10th grade, I think I took it like you had. We had a mandatory class and I took it. So I was already ready for it. Was easy for me at that point.
test out of it.
Yeah, I still had to do it, but it was a lot easier. And it's funny, I get, as a blind person, I get a lot of really weird questions. The kind of some of the most default things is people talk to me real loud, like they think I can't hear. I'm like, my eyes are the problem, not my hearing. But then another problem I run into is, well, not problem, but people ask me how I type. They say, do you have a large print keyboard? And I was like, well, I can't see the keyboard. So, most people who type don't look at it anyhow. So that was never a temptation for me to look down because I literally couldn't. I couldn't see the keys.
Right. No, it's funny. You mentioned talking louder. I remember when I lived in Germany, that was like the default. You're talking to somebody who doesn't understand English, and so the default is to talk louder, thinking that they're going to understand you better, and it just doesn't work out. Oh my goodness.
Yeah, it's interesting. So, so the people you work with in your around your that you manage, I guess, do they all just go take laptops home, or do they have any special machines, that kind of stuff?
No, we all have pretty much the same thing. I think everybody on my team is running Windows except me. So, and again, I could have run Windows if I'd have wanted to. I just stuck with a Mac because it's just easy for me. You get to a certain age, you don't want to change, right? Just get off my lawn. Give me my Mac. But no, we all have pretty much the same capabilities. We all have access to the Citrix. And so if we need to do something on a virtual machine, let it run in the background, we can do that. But a lot of the software we have is things that a lot of SEO people use. We use Snagit to take screenshots. We do a lot of screenshots. You're showing search result pages, and sometimes it's handy for that. Handy for showing examples and, plop something on the screen and mark it up so you can show, change this, update this. That's always nice for that kind of thing.
Right.
And then I use, the Windows folks use Notepad++, and I use Sublime Text. It's so much easier for dealing with, if you've got a big text file and you want to keep it as a text file and you don't want Word to mess up the formatting, like a robots text file or an XML sitemap, that's just
htaccess, yeah.
Or an HT. Oh yeah. Oh my goodness. Could you imagine what Windows would do to an htaccess file? Or I should say Word, because if you open it up in just regular Notepad, it's usually okay. I remember Notepad was when I built my first websites. That's what I used Notepad and coded HTML by hand.
Right.
Because we didn't have any WYSIWYG things at that point, at least none that I knew of. I think the first WYSIWYG thing I had was, oh my goodness, was there
something called Cakewalk or Cake something? I can't remember. Or Hot Dog.
Hot Dog was one back in the day. I remember that one. I think I might have gotten a demo of that one, but if I remember correctly, Netscape Navigator for a time had a WYSIWYG web page builder, and I think it was either that one or it was another browser. I don't remember which one, but that was the first one that I remember using. Yeah. And then later on, I got Dreamweaver and a couple others. But then when I started doing things with in ASP.NET, we just did everything in Visual Studio, I think was. That's right. Well, that was a long time. It wasn't that long ago, but I don't even remember what it was called. Visual Studio. Yeah.
Yeah, I still use Dreamweaver. Now that I'm back on PC, I'm gonna start using Notepad++ again. I really do like it, but I've used Dreamweaver for a while now. I like it a lot. I don't use the WYSIWYG part of it. I just use the code editor, which is real nice. It's got an amazing search feature. That's one of the things I love about that, because you can actually use regular expressions, and then you can say search a directory. So I can go put in a regular expression, and then if I have it the drive mapped, or if I have it on my hard drive, I could just browse to that directory and say search every single file in here and use regular expressions and find everything I need. It's so useful.
That's very handy. Oh my goodness. Wouldn't you love to have something like that when you're looking for that one page?
Yeah. I'm working on a big project right now. I'm helping out another SEO. And so I'm doing programming. It's just this person has an all HTML website, and it's like, I forget how many pages. It was almost 1.4 gigs of files.
Oh, wow.
That's probably images mostly, but it also had. Mm-hmm. Last time I looked, when it was downloading, it took forever to download. There were like 9,000 files, so it's a big one. So I've got to go through that sucker a bunch of times. Yeah. That'll be helpful doing that.
Oh, absolutely, that would be great. I remember back in the day when I would do pitches, when I was doing freelance work, I remember building demo websites and putting them on a floppy disk and walking into the guy, here, put that on, click on this, open it up in your browser. Heck, you can't do that anymore. Obviously you could build a demo other ways, but putting it on a disk anymore, I can't even imagine. That seemed like, sneakernet, and it just seems like it's just totally antique now.
Yeah, and then there were CDs and then DVDs, and then there were zip drives. Mm-hmm. Remember those?
I remember zip drives. I remember Bernoulli drives. It's like, ooh, oh yeah, wow, that thing holds 1.5 gigs. Whoa.
Wow. Yeah, I did some work at Texaco years and years ago, and they had their building had been built around the computer structure in the 60s. So they had giant computers, but by the time it was the 90s, that was just office space, and people would work on raised floors and stuff. And they would have antiques mm-hmm. on their desks of like, giant floppy drives or giant hard drives or these just, mm-hmm. It looked like just something a giant would use, just,
oh, no kidding. That stuff was so huge. I was at, when my son turned 14, we went to NASA mm-hmm. and did the Level 9 tour. I mean, if you're a space geek, that's something you gotta go for. But you have to be 14 to do.
Florida or in Houston?
No, the one in Houston.
Okay.
Right. Yeah, I was living in Austin at the time.
Right.
And I remember looking at some of the, like the old Mission Control and then comparing it to the new Mission Control and thinking, holy smokes, what a difference in just a few decades. And, you're looking at, your iPhone has more computing power than it took to send up someone to the moon. It just blows my mind to think about that.
Yeah, I've seen those things. I mean, I live down the street from NASA, and and I have 2 brother-in-laws that work at NASA. So I've seen some pretty cool stuff. They take me in there and show me some of the things that they're mm-hmm. working on. My sister's brother, he works on spacesuits, and boy, he just has the most amazing stories, and
I'll bet.
It's just neat. He's an engineer, and he just tells me all that kind of cool stuff.
The tour guide we had worked at NASA during the Apollo phase.
Oh wow!
And he also worked on Skylab, the first space station that we put up. And he was the guy who helped come up with the idea of the solar umbrella, because I don't remember exactly what happened, but one of the heat shields failed and it got too hot when they were on the suns. Anyway, he worked on the project that developed that solar umbrella that they launched up with another crew that they poked through. They put a hole in it somehow, and they put that thing out there, and it was a shield that helped to keep it cool when they were on the sun side of the Earth. Fascinating guy. He just had he had all kinds of stories from the Apollo days and whatnot, because he was working on the engineering teams. Fascinating stuff. And I grew up in that whole time. As when I was a little kid, I remember when Neil Armstrong landed on the moon. I was 5 or 6, and my mom woke me up because it was at like 9 o'clock at night and said, "Here, you need to sit and watch this. You'll remember it the rest of your life."
Nice.
And she was right. I still remember it.
Yeah. So one other thing you had mentioned, that you use a trackball. I don't know too many people that do that. Tell me that story.
I have carpal tunnel. It drives me nuts sometimes, and especially using the touchpad on the Mac, sometimes it makes my wrists flare up.
Sure.
So I got a Logitech Trackball. It just allows your hand to sit nicely on the desk in a very natural position, and you use your fingers for the buttons, and then you use your thumb to move the mouse around. It takes a lot of getting used to. It was a week before I could even control it because it's so sensitive, and you end up spinning the cursor across the desktop like crazy. But once you get it under control and you figure it out, oh my goodness, it's such a difference. It helps so much. My
mother used one a long time ago, and she's back to mice for. I don't know why she needed it then, but doesn't need it now. But that was pretty interesting.
I was going to grab it. It's not on the desk where it's supposed to be. I must have used it somewhere else.
That's
It's It's not it's not Bluetooth, but it's got the little plug-in remote that goes into the USB port,
Right.
so it's wireless. So obviously, it's
probably the 2.4 gigahertz thing.
Yeah, so it's around here somewhere. So I had it plugged into one of our Linux boxes for a time, and now it's missing.
Well, thank you so much, Elmer, for coming on the show. I'd like to, keep in touch, and if you ever want to come on and talk anything, you're always welcome.
Well, absolutely. Thank you. I really appreciate the opportunity to come in here and gab about tech stuff with you.
Thank you. And thank you so much for coming to Marketing Tech. Once again, I'm David Ogletree from WMEtraining.com, and Elmer Boutin is from GTB Agency. Thank you so much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.